Miyuyam. Greetings, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and all of the other committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of NAFOA, which is the Native American Finance Officers Association. My name is Amy Minniear. I am the treasurer of the Pechanga Band of Indians, as well as the treasurer of the NAFOA board. Tribal nations are not peripheral to the national economy. We are essential contributors to it. The policies of this subcommittee that you oversee directly affects the capacity that tribal governments use. It directly affects the capacity of tribal governments to serve their citizens, develop our economies, and fulfill the promises embedded in federal trust and treaty obligations. Respecting tribal sovereignty is not just a legal obligation, it's sound economic policy. When tribal nations have the tools to build strong, self-determined economies, Indian country and the nation will be stronger for it. Last month, the NAFOA board president, Rodney Butler, testified before the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs regarding the federal economic development assistance programs. NAFOA has been working on several recommendations, but I'd like to highlight three. First, all federal programs should be designed in coordination with the tribes from the start, not at the end. We also need to provide comprehensive training and technical assistance. And lastly, we strongly encourage to collect tribal data that is so desperately needed in order to plan for the future. These are not abstract recommendations. They reflect lived experience with tribal financial officers, tribal leaders, and administrators who navigate this complex federal system daily. Congress has not just an opportunity, but an obligation to act on them. And NAFOA looks forward to working with the administration and Congress in order to continue to make improvements. Now, this is very exciting. I'd like to talk about taxes. So last month, the bipartisan Tribal Tax and Investment Reform Act of 2026 was entered. It's H.R. 7705. This was introduced by Representatives Gwen Moore and David Schweikirk. Thank you. This legislation addresses longstanding inequities in the federal tax code that put tribal nations at a strong disadvantage relative to state and local governments. This bill will address four critical areas: tax-exempt bond access, a new markets tax credit, low-income housing tax credit, and the general welfare exclusion. Of these, the bond gap is the most striking. So let's talk about that a moment. According to the Brookings Institute, from 2014 to 2020, state governments issued $47 billion annually in non-taxable municipal bonds. In that same time frame, tribal governments issued only $84 million in tax-exempt bonds. This gap is not the result of a diminished need or the lack of economic ambition. It is the direct result of inequity and inequitable policy. A central driver of this inequity is the essential governmental function test, which limits tribal bond financing to the narrowest set of purposes available to any government. The IRS interprets this standard as prohibiting tribal governments from financing commercial or industrial projects, including hotels, convention centers, golf courses, that cities and counties finance regularly as part of their economic development. Thank you for that piece. The next piece, can you tell it's my first time testifying? The next piece is the cursory fix. I would like to talk briefly about that. The Supreme Court The Supreme Court's decision of the Kasuri decision has imposed high costs on tribal nations' costly litigation, restricting land into trust processes, and has deterred investments in Indian country. Today, or recently, H.R. 5257, introduced last September by Chairman Cole, addresses this directly by reaffirming the status of all land taken into trust for any federally recognized tribal nation prior to the bill's enactment. NAFOA supports this legislation and urges the subcommittee to do the same. Next, we'd like to talk about appropriations and reclassification. Inconsistent federal funding cycles imposes real costs on tribal governments when programs that carry legal obligations are funded through discretionary appropriations. Tribes cannot reliably plan on services that their citizens depend on. This was mentioned before. NAFOA recommends reclassifying tribally directed programs, in particular contract support costs and payments for tribal leases under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act as mandatory appropriations. Next, the Indian Loan Guarantee Program. NAFOA encourages Congress to protect and expand available lending authority through the Department of Interior Indian Loan Guarantee Program, as the ILGP is a critical tool for tribal capital assets, but as currently authorized. Tribes cannot combine the ILGP financing with a new market tax credit. This is a significant limitation, with a simple, low-cost legislative fix, resolving it would be meaningful to tribes across the nation. In conclusion, we look forward to working with Congress and the administration to ensure that the federal investments in tribal economies are commensurate with the federal government's trust and treaty obligations. The evidence is clear. When tribal nations have the policy tools, capital access, and institutional support to develop their economies, their communities thrive, and so does the national economy. Honoring tribal sovereignty and investing in tribal economic development is not charity. It is responsible governance. Thank you so much for your attention to these vital matters, and NAFOA stands ready to support.